I sort of came up with a definition that activism is being led by your values to purposeful work in the hopes of making the world brighter for other people.
And then the other part of it, your sort of subline, your subtext, is that you can do this and still have joy.
Oh, absolutely.
My name is Linda Laurel, and I'm asking you to have the courage to listen with an open mind to all of our voices, because our voices matter. I want to take a moment to thank BMW of West Houston for sponsoring this episode of our Voices Matter podcast. BMW, of course, is known as the ultimate driving machine because of its precision and power. As someone who has driven a BMW for many years now, I can attest to that firsthand. But I think what's even more important, especially about this particular BMW dealership, is that it understands the power and the impact of giving back to its community. BMW of West Houston is known for its support of countless local charities, and that is important to us here at our Voices Matter podcast. So if you choose to do business with BMW of West Houston, not only will you be getting the stellar first-class service that the dealership is known for, but you can also rest assured that you are doing business with a dealership that truly cares about and gives back to its community.
Hi, everybody. It's Linda Laurel, and this is our Voices Matter podcast. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite some time now. I was thrilled when I called her and asked her if she would do the podcast, and she said yes. My guest today is Karen Walrond, author, activism and leadership coach, speaker and photographer, senior director of global engagement of the Brene Brown Education and Research Group. She is just an incredible woman, and I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. So Karen and I first met many years ago, shortly after the release of her first book, The Beauty of Different. Most recently, she has released a book called The Lightmakers Manifesto: How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy. I cannot recommend both of these books highly enough. If you are looking for a breath of fresh air, some inspiration, and some positivity in this crazy, chaotic, divisive world that we're living in, this episode is for you. Enjoy. Karen Walrond, I cannot believe I am having you on my podcast. Thank you so much for saying yes and welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, it's such an honor. And we were talking beforehand. I am just always thrilled to have an opportunity to connect with you. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. So I was just thinking back to the first time that I think I met you.
Yeah.
And I cannot believe that you said it was 2010. It was when The Beauty of Different came out. That was forever ago.
Forever ago. I know. But the pandemic has sort of warped our sense of time. So
yes, it
could
truly
be forgiven.
has.
Yeah.
It truly has. And I do want to talk about that book because it's just truly beautiful and so inspiring. But your most recent book, The Lightmakers Manifesto: How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy.
Indeed.
So yeah, I just finished reading it. I loved it. What a breath of fresh air. What an inspiration. I'm working on my manifesto.
Nice.
So thank you very much.
I love to hear that. That's awesome.
Okay. So my question first is, why this book in this moment?
Well, I would love to say that I had this muse inside of me just crying to get out to write this book about the intersection of joy and activism, but that would be a total lie. My publisher, who was not my publisher for before this book, reached out to me it would have been like January 2nd, 2020. She had read my books, my earlier book, and she had read other things that I'd written and said, you don't know me, but our publisher is looking for a book on the intersection of joy and activism, and I think you could do it. And luckily for her, I had chosen the words bold and experiment for my words for the year. So I said, yeah, sure, I could totally do that. And hung up the phone or hung up the Zoom and thought, I have no... Why would I think I could do this?
What?
Right? Yeah. Like who thought I'm not an activist, right? Activists are people who get tear gassed or have police dogs set on them. That's not what I do. Right. So I thought, well, I love interviewing people. I had interviewed a lot of people in my first book. And so I thought, well, who do I know that might be up for an interview? And so I started making a list, and I made Brene Brown was one of the first people who was on my list. Tarana Burke is a friend and the founder of the Me Too movement. And I made this list, and I realized that these men and women that I had listed were undoubtedly in my mind activists, but they weren't people who were getting arrested or tear gassed. And so I wondered, why was it okay for me to use those words for them and not for me when I had certainly done similar types of work? And that's really what the book explores. It sort of explores, what does activism look like, and how can you do it in a way that feels integral to the person that you are, and that makes you of service in a way that feels just very natural and even joy-giving.
I love the way you explain how this came to be. And so I'm going to read to you something from your book that resonated with me, because I never thought of myself as an activist until I read this. And this is what you wrote.
Okay.
We can proactively take the things that fuel us, our gifts and our passions, and use them to serve the world. We are called to activate others and advocate for the causes that mean the most to us. Being purposeful in using our gifts and talents as fuel for our commitment to serve, even in a world of tremendous pain and injustice, we can minimize the possibility of burnout or even avoid it altogether. So that first part is where I went, I think I'm an activist. And I know, I mean, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, because so this podcast is my form of activism.
Of course.
It is a form of activism. I never thought about it in those words, but the genesis of it was me trying to figure out a way to use my skills and talents to make the world better. To help bring us together as humans, to help bridge our divides, to help see ourselves in each other's stories, because I truly believe that if we can do that, we can stop all of this nonsense of demonizing and dehumanizing each other.
Absolutely.
So that's my activism. And I think we are so closely aligned in how we are going about using our respective talents and gifts.
Well,
so thank
absolutely. My pleasure. And I will tell you, you are not the first person to tell me after reading the book that they suddenly went, wait a minute, I might be an activist, right? Like my father was the first person who read the book, and he was the first person to say it. And I think it's really interesting that somehow activism, people have ascribed to it a connotation of suffering. And I think that's why a lot of people think I can't be an activist, because even if I do things that help serve the world, I'm not suffering enough to have earned the title of activist. And
activist,
right, you know, and so I think that's fun. And so I sort of came up with a definition that activism is being led by your values to purposeful work in the hopes of making the world brighter for other people. And if you use that definition, suddenly the possibilities of how to enter into activism really sort of open up to you, and you start to realize, this is not something that's intimidating or scary. I could absolutely do this, and I might even be called to do it.
Right. And then the other part of it, your sort of subline, your subtext, is that you can do this and still have joy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, it's hard. Yes, you can burn out if you're not careful to take care of yourself as the journey unfolds. But the point is that you can make that difference. You can keep your, pedal to the metal, feet to the fire, whatever, you want to say, and still have that joy. So what are some of the tools and tips to find and maintain that joy as we are working toward helping to make things better in whatever the particular struggle is that we have chosen to embark upon?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the women that I interviewed in the book, her name is Valerie Kaur, and she's a civil rights activist and a lawyer. And I mean, she's doing amazing work for immigration rights. And she was the person that sort of crystallized why joy is not just something that you can have, but if you're going to have any sort of longevity in the work, you must have it, because the truth is, and this
Right.
was something that she said that felt both depressing and freeing at the same time. She said that we probably aren't going to get to the world to the point where the world is free of whatever it is we're railing against as activists, right? Like it's probably not going to happen
Yeah.
in our lifetime,
Right.
which is depressing, but it's also freeing because then now you can say, okay, the point is to make progress, right? The point is to
Right.
take the baton from the people who came before us and pass it to the people who come after us. And the only way that we can have longevity in the work is to cultivate that joy, right? So, and it was so crystallizing for me. And so the way that I posit and share for how you do that is one, it requires a lot of introspection. I'm a huge journaler and I provide journal prompts all through
Hmm.
the book, but it's about
Yes.
really tapping into a couple of things. One is, what is the thing that you love to do that you would do no matter what, whether you got paid for it or not? What is that thing that brings you joy normally? Right?
Hmm.
Two, what is the cause that incites passion in you? And passion could be, I really love this cause, or this issue makes me so angry, like it drives me to that kind of a passion, right? And
Yeah.
then
Hmm.
how do you figure out how to do that thing that you love to be in service of that cause? So you're doing something that you love to do anyway, and you're helping be of service in the world. And then the last part of it has to do with connection and gratitude and self compassion, that you have to be able to
Mm.
listen to the ebb and the flow so that not only that you're going and going and going when you're feeling strong, but sometimes just like when you breathe, you have to inhale, you have to stop so that you
Yeah.
can gather that energy to exhale and push again. And so you do that by connecting with like minded people, by relying on your friends and loved ones, by making sure that you're taking media breaks if you have to, just for your own sanity, that you're drinking lots of water and like doing whatever makes you feel healthy, getting a good night's sleep, and really sort of, tapping out when you need to tap out and then gather your energy to go back in. And it's not even about self-care like, oh wow, I'm burned out now I need to heal. I mean, obviously you should do that, but it's also about
Hmm.
just making sure that before you even burn out, that you pull back, inhale, gather that energy so you can go back in full force. So it's sort of a three,
Yeah.
four pronged like stool, three, four pronged
Yeah.
tool on how you actually continue to have that longevity in the work.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I read that part of the book, I started thinking to myself, okay, I know I am on the right path because I answered those
Hmm.
questions that you were posing. And I thought, okay, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And that feels really good. Now, I've not been a big journaler on a consistent basis throughout my life. There have been periods of time where I have journaled and then I'll stop
Hmm.
and then I'll pick it up again and then I'll stop. And I'm at a point now where I'm trying to pick that up again. And I really get the value in
Hmm.
that, and it helping you sort of dig out whatever is going down beneath, is going on underneath the surface, so that you can bring it to the light. And sometimes when you see it in front of you, it's like, oh,
There it
hello.
is, right?
Aha, there's that moment.
Yeah.
There is that moment.
I am a
Yeah.
huge journaler, and I do journal every single day. Like I'm a very avid journaler, but I understand that I mean that is something that I picked up as
Yeah.
an adult, as well into adulthood. It's not something that I've done all my life at all. But I always say that what the benefit for me for journaling is, I mean, I'm sure you're the same way. You're if you're one of those people that all your friends are like, "Oh my gosh, I knew I could come to you. I knew you'd help me figure it out." And you're like, "That's
Mm.
great. I helped figure it out, but why can't I do that with my own life?" Right? Like why can't I figure out my own life? Like a journal, like
Yeah.
writing things down, and for me, like
Yeah.
actually
Makes a
handwriting
difference.
things down, so that you're
Yeah.
slow enough to write. It helps take you out of yourself and sort of be that best
Hmm.
friend to yourself, because when you
Yeah.
see it, you go, "Oh, that I can figure out. I know where that's coming from. I know what that's about." We have our own
Yeah.
inner wisdom, and sometimes it just means stopping and being a little bit more objective about it. And for me, that's what a journal does for me. So I love daily journaling if you can do it. I think it's great, but I think it's also good to
Yeah.
journal when you need it and put it aside and then journal and come back. Like I don't think that
Exactly.
it's something that you necessarily like need to be
Did
writing.
you start as a child
No,
or as
no,
an
no, no. I
adult?
started probably I mean, I'm trying to think. I probably was 40. Like I was well
Okay.
into adulthood
Yeah.
before I
Okay.
started. And
Okay.
now I do it. I mean, I use it to clear my head before I start my day. So it's the
Yeah.
first thing that I do. I do
Yeah.
just one page, um, and just empty my head, and then tackle my to-do list, and then go from there. But my mother does it at night. I got her doing it. She's in her 80s, and I finally got her doing it, and she does it at night. She doesn't like doing it in the morning. So whatever feels right. The point is to use it
Yeah.
as a tool, right? Like it's not about
Mm-hmm.
great prose or
Mm-hmm.
becoming a wonderful writer. It's
Right.
just sort of
Right.
dumping and seeing what comes up.
Just dumping what's in your
Yeah.
head. So, talk to me a little bit about your backstory. You just mentioned your mom, and I know your dad was an engineer. You're originally from
Yep.
Trinidad. So, talk to me a little bit about how you grew up and what it is in your background that you think led you to this work that you're doing
Oh,
now.
that's such a good question. So, yeah, so I was born in the Caribbean. I was born in Trinidad and Tobago. My parents are Trinidadian. Um, I grew up, my dad's a petroleum engineer. He was quite poor when he was the second of nine kids, and his father was he was the schoolmaster at a local school in the village he grew up in Trinidad. I don't think his father ever graduated high school, but sort of self-taught himself into being able to teach others. Um, and
Mm,
my mother and my dad scholarshiped his way into a PhD. Like he just kept going in school. He was really great at math, and he ended up going to college and graduate school and getting a PhD in petroleum engineering. My mother grew up actually relatively well off in Trinidad as well, but grew up at a time when um, it was not, it was considered, at least in Trinidad, a waste of money to send women to college. That they were going to get
mm.
married anyway. And my grandfather was quite the feminist. And so he said, nope, I'm educating my daughters. And so she ended up getting degrees in Spanish and French. And her facility is in language. She's very really, she speaks five languages now. She just goes to a new country and
Wow.
picks up a language. They lived in Norway for a while. She picked up Norwegian. They lived in Azerbaijan. She picked up Russian. So she's just really, really gifted with
Wow.
languages. And through all of that, I think they really were very much because they lived in all these various places. Thanks to my dad's job as a petroleum engineer, everywhere they went, they tried to do something. Not just it wasn't really so much to give back, but as much as it was to really immerse themselves in the culture. And as part of that, it was how can we serve the community that we're in
Mm.
so that we can become a part of and connect with and get to know the people who we're working with and who are hosting us in this country. And so they did a lot of that, and it was just sort of their nature. So when they were in Azerbaijan, my mother helped teach English at an orphanage, and like it was just sort of the things that
Yeah.
my dad teaches math now. He's retired and he's in his 80s, and he still tutors kids in math. And it was something. It was really in a lot of ways their tool for connection, which is why I think in a lot of what my dad called me and said, "Oh my gosh, I think I may have been an activist." I don't know that it would have ever dawned on them as that this is
Mm.
something that out of the goodness and big-heartedness of myself, it was sort of like, "Oh, there's a need, I can help." And in the process, I
Let me
can
do it.
connect,
Yeah.
right? And so I think
Hmm.
they raised both my sister and I in that way. So I've always sort of looked around and seen what I could do to help. And if I could do it in a way that was fun for me, then more's the better. So as a photographer, I traveled places with the One campaign because photography is one of my joys. And it was something that was needed. I helped with
Hmm.
Habitat for Humanity. I would take photographs of the ceremonies when they would get their keys and then frame the pictures for the families that were getting their new homes. And it was just a way for me to connect and get to know people and also use what came easily to me of service. And so in a lot of ways, I think um, that's why the publisher sort of found me because she'd seen my photographs and seen some of the work I'd done, and why the book felt very natural to do. And I will say, you
Hmm.
know, I told you January 2020 was when my publisher contacted me. But I didn't actually start writing it till March 2020. And if you think about it, like March,
Right as the
pandemic's
pandemic
coming,
hit.
George
Yeah.
Floyd was still alive when I
Yeah.
started writing. Breonna Taylor was still alive.
Yep.
So there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
crazy stuff that was happening that
Happening.
year.
Yeah.
And in a way, it was such a gift to be able to write it because I was meeting it while all these awful things were happening. I was interviewing these amazing people
Mm.
that were doing things to help save the world and doing it because it was what they loved to do. And
Yes.
that's a very empowering and hope giving exercise, right? Is being able to connect with people like
Yes.
that. So I don't know if that answers your question. It was a pretty long-winded answer to your question, but
Yeah.
it was just
No,
sort
no,
of
no.
natural that it kind of came up.
Yes, and just hearing the backstory a little bit, about your family and how you grew up, and what was important to your parents and the values that they lived by and instilled in you. And so I know you moved to the Houston area, to
Yeah.
Kingwood, just outside of Houston, when you were a
I was
teenager, right?
11 when I moved back and
11.
forth, but when I was in Kingwood, it was from 7th to ninth grade. So 11 to 13 was pretty much when I was there. Yeah.
Okay. So I bring that up because that brings me to your previous book, The Beauty of
Yes.
Different, which is this is, for those of you who are watching, this is my copy that
Oh,
Karen signed for me back in 2010. And it's such a beautiful,
thank
beautiful
you.
book on so many different levels. But you start that book by talking about how you felt like
Oh,
the
yeah.
other when you moved to Kingwood. And that's something I always ask my guests to talk about. And you can talk about that and maybe something else as well. But what I'm interested in hearing is, what is the experience like when you are made to feel like the other, whether it's at 11 years old or if it's at 40 or 45, in a personal or
Mm.
professional manner or setting. What did it make you feel like? How did you deal with it in the moment? What did you learn from it? And then how are you using those lessons to show up today?
Wow, that's a deep question. It
Yes,
really
ma'am.
is. So when I think back to moving, so I was 11 years old. I was moving from my country, from Trinidad. I looked funny.
Mm.
Back in Trinidad, 11-year-olds pretty much they didn't wear makeup. Um, I had my hair natural, and remember this is the late 70s as well, right? So, and I had an accent. I spoke like a Trinidadian, so my voice was totally different. And when I came, people would hear me, and they would know immediately I was not from America, or certainly not from Texas, right? Um,
Right.
and so and then all the girls were wearing makeup already, and they were wearing heels to school, and I was, so it was very
Yeah.
jarring for me. Also, remember, these I'm with 12 and 13-year-olds um who tend to put people in buckets, right? So
Yes.
all the white
Yes.
kids that I went to school with were like, oh, she's black, so she doesn't belong with us. And all the black kids could hear my accent and hear how I spoke, and they say, well, she's not really black because she don't speak like us. So you don't belong with us
Mm.
either, right? Because remember, I mean, they're kids and it's the
Mm-hmm.
70s. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so how it felt was I felt like I was doing everything wrong, right? Like right? Like that,
Yeah.
it wasn't even that I was strange as much as it was I'm doing it wrong. I'm doing 11 wrong, or or I'm doing 7th grade wrong. Like I'm doing it wrong. Um
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
I'm a smart kid, so I fixed my accent and I started to sound a lot more American, and which is actually something that I quite regret now, that that it
I,
bothers.
I love when you just go right into the lilt of your accent. It's so
Thank you.
beautiful. And to feel that you had to hide that and change it
Thank
and
you.
you know, push it down is just, oh, you should
Well,
talk that way
exactly.
all
And
the time, as far as
the
I'm
reason I
concerned.
regret doing it is because I don't really think about it anymore, right? Like if I'm speaking to a Trinidadian,
Yeah,
I don't even think about it, and this
yeah.
is how I speak. I speak like I'm or a West Indian.
Hmm.
But if I'm speaking to an American, I
Hmm.
switch, and it's I don't really it's very unconscious right now.
Yeah.
And I wish I didn't. I wish I'd
Mm.
Chimamanda Adichie talks about how she held on to her Nigerian accent when she came to America on purpose, and I wish
Mm.
I had done the same. But I had learned to assimilate, which um now I'm a little bit skeptical of that word. That I think sort of, and really I write about it in The Beauty of Different, that I think that the fact that I looked different and sounded different, and the more I bring my difference into a room, the more
Mm,
the possibilities of what can emerge from that room expand, right? So now I
yes.
am far more, and I'm also older, right? Like I'm in my 50s now, and it's 2021, and people are freer to be who they are in the
Right.
21st century. So it's a little bit different, but I'm far more mindful of, if I ever feel like, oh, I don't fit in, to really tamp that down and talk about, in the words of my friend Brene, fitting in is not the goal, belonging is the goal. And I have to belong to myself first before
Right.
I can worry about belonging anywhere else. And that's really the magic of it now. Um, but it's a lesson I think that time had to teach me. I don't know that I would have believed it if anybody told me that at 11, trying to navigate that at at that time. But I believe it now.
Yes, yes. And so at this point in your life, with all of the success that you've had, and switching from your career as an engineer and a lawyer into
Mm.
what you're doing now, being an author and an
Look at me.
activist, right? and a keynote speaker and a coach, and all of the amazing things, and of course your incredibly beautiful
Thank you.
photography. Um, so even now, with all of everything that you have achieved, do you ever still have moments when you don't feel like you belong, and how do you deal with that now at this point in your life? And I ask that because you know um, again, the premise of the podcast is just that we're all somebody
Mm.
else's other at
Yeah.
some point, for whatever reason it might be. It might be race, it might be gender, it might be ethnicity or religion, or
Yep.
pick a thing. um, but somehow we've got to find a way to remind ourselves of the common humanity that we have. And so I'm always interested in how people navigate that. You just gave us the example of how you dealt with it
Yeah.
as a child. So what are your thoughts about it now as an adult in the environment that we're all living
Yeah.
in?
So, and it's such a polarizing environment right now. My decision to kind of shed some of that happened. I was a lawyer in oil and gas. Um, and I was working for one of the big oil services companies that was, you know, very, very white and male. I used to say that diversity at this organization was a geologist from Louisiana and a geologist from Oklahoma, right? That were all both white and male and middle aged. Like that was really it. And I
Yeah.
remember like really trying
Hmm.
to be like, okay, so what does a lawyer look like at this company? And I try to fit in, and I'm like, look at me. Like there's no way I'm ever going to be a white middle-aged man. Like that's just never going to happen.
Hmm.
And it's right. So
Not
I just
happening.
thought, well, I just
Hmm.
might as well give up and just show up as my very best self, right? And so, yeah, of course, sometimes I go in and I will notice that I'm the only fill in the blank, right? Only woman of color, um, whatever, only person my age or whatever. Um, but I'm not bothered by it anymore. I used to be, that used to bother me. I still notice it, but I'm not bothered by it. And one of the things I come up with a word of the year every year, and this year I sort of have a phrase, and my phrase is bright life, big heart can't lose. Bright life, big heart can't lose. And that if I come in
Mm.
shining myself as much as I can, being open and to being of service and figuring out how can I serve this gathering today? What is it I can bring? Then no
Hmm.
matter what, whether or not people think I belong or not, I can't lose, right? Because I'm staying in my integrity and I'm
Right.
showing up as my very, very best self. And everything else and any other thing anybody else wants to ascribe to me, that's on them, because I'm going in the best way I can.
Yeah.
So it takes practice to get to that point, right? Like I don't mean to say that
Sure.
that was ever easy for me. It's certainly easy for me now. But I'm not,
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
if you're not used to doing that, that can still feel very scary. Um,
Sure. And so, you know what?
yeah,
What you just said is your book. It's you are embodying the beauty of being different, because you talk about, you are embracing
absolutely.
who you are. I'm
Absolutely.
different. I'm not a middle-aged white
Yeah.
man. I'm not this, but this is what I am. I have to be okay
Yeah.
with that and embrace that and put that out there because that's how I can show up as my best self
With
with
integrity.
integrity, which
Yeah, for
brings me to my
sure.
next question. Yes. So in the, I think it's in the Light Makers Manifesto where you talk about the difference between integrity
Yeah.
and authenticity. And I love that section. And so talk a little bit about that. And then I've got a quote that I want to share with you that's one of my favorite quotes
Yeah,
from that
absolutely.
section. But go
So,
ahead.
one of the things that I feel like authenticity over time has become a little bit warped, right? Like sort of the definition. I think it used to mean being true to yourself or being real or that kind of thing. And I think over time it's become more
Yeah.
of sharing. Like I to be authentic, I have to share when I'm in a really hard, difficult place, or I have to share when things have gone completely wrong. And I don't mean to suggest that there isn't some power in doing that, because there is, but I think that people get to the point where it's sort of oversharing and like, well, I'm just, or it's an excuse for bad behavior, right? Like it's sort of like, well, I'm going to say this cruel thing,
Mm,
but I'm just being real, right? I'm just being authentic. And so
yeah.
so
Right.
I think that it would behoove us all, especially in a time when things are so polarizing, is to move in integrity
Hmm.
over authenticity. And so because authenticity has that sort of, well, you know, damn the consequences. I'm just going to be raw and be
Be who I am.
right.
Yeah.
And
Just going to be
I
me.
would
Yeah.
hope that being me, that if you really want to be me, you want to really be your best me. You don't want to be the base part of
Right.
you, right? And
Right.
so if you hook into
Exactly.
values and to your authenticity, you can still be very honest. You can still be very much who you want to be without sacrificing dishonesty, or without sacrificing or without playing to something, right? So being
Hmm.
having integrity is to me far more powerful, because it means that even if I communicate my truth, I'm going to do it in a way that is into my values. So I can still say the truth, but
Right.
maybe I'm not going to be cruel about it. Maybe I'm going to be mindful about it. Maybe I'm going to be aware of how the words that I use might be perceived in the wrong way, so I can be clearer so that it's not perceived incorrectly. Or I'm going to be mindful that I'm in a really angry place right now. So maybe speaking right now is not the moment. Maybe I need to step back and think about how to convey what's caused that anger in a way that's not furious and not mean spirited. So, yeah, so that's for me is the difference.
Hmm.
And I far more am interested in people who move in integrity than in authenticity, honestly.
Yeah. In that same section, you talk about
Mm.
Brene and how she's always talking about choosing
Mm-hmm.
courage over comfort. And I love that whole section. And then you talk about you quote
Oh, sweet
Jordan
Jordan. Yeah.
Seabury, and oh my goodness. And here's what I really love about his quote. He says, "I try to approach everyone knowing that there are pieces of their story that I don't know
Mm.
and won't ever know. But if you think about it, empathy is actually tied up in that unknowing. We don't have to know everyone's story
Yeah.
to love them."
He's magical. And he's this
Amen.
young, I don't even know if he's 30 yet. He's
Oh,
this young kid, and he's just love.
yeah. Tell our
Yeah.
audience
So
who he
Jordan
is,
is this
Jordan
great
Seabury.
Jordan, unlike Brene or Tarana or some of the people that made that first list that I made when I started writing the book, Jordan is
Hmm.
somebody I didn't know before I approached him to interview him. A friend had linked to his Instagram page. He's this really brilliant artist, a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design. And she was just linking to a piece of his art. And I saw it. I love art. So I went and saw it, and I noticed his bio said, public policy director by day, painter by night. And I thought, oh, that's activism and joy. This sounds like an interesting guy. So I reached out to him and I said, would you be interested in being interviewed for this book? And sort of told him who I was. And happily he said yes. And so I met with him. Again, I had never met him before. And he was this really bright kid with this sort of peace around him. He like, it was almost like being counseled, even though I was the interviewer. And he's from the south side of Chicago, and grew up, in the South Side in this great two parent home and everything, and then moved to RISD, um, and was surrounded by people that had a lot of wealth, and it really sort of jarred him. And so he was again moved to do things like help feed people who didn't have food in Providence, and he started donating some of the food that he ate at the cafeteria to them. And at one point, he's had a bit of a crisis and
Mm.
actually ended up homeless for a while. He left school until he sort of found himself again, and then came back to a place where he could really enjoy making his art and also helping the community that he was in. And he's just this really special person. And I can't imagine what he's going to bring to the world when he's 50, 60, 70 years old, right? Whether he has all the, because he's just really, really made of light. He really is.
Yeah, yeah. So you were so
I,
fortunate to be able to interview people like Jordan and Tarana and Brene, and I know the work that you are the senior director of
yeah, for
global
Brene. Yeah.
engagement. Is that right? For BBERG, yeah, for Brene Brown Education and Research Group. So what does that entail? What does that role
Yeah.
mean?
So
What do you do?
it's primarily just helping ensure, one of the missions of Beberg is to make the world a braver place. And Brene approached me to
Hmm.
actually to this is a pretty recent position for me, and she said I need somebody to help make sure that what we talk about and our work and everything else um, you know is not lost in translation to countries around the world, right? And that we are mindful that we are constantly having a sort of global worldview as we create our work, as we create the work that we do. And I thought to her, I thought,
Hmm.
why would you ask me to do? I'm an engineer and a lawyer. Like, why would you ask me to do this? But I'm an immigrant, and I'm married to an immigrant, and I've traveled a lot and traveled with work a lot as well as for pleasure. I've lived in different countries, and she said, your global mindset is really what I'm looking for." So I basically,
Mm,
a lot of it has to, her books have been translated in over 40 languages around the world, and she gets speaking opportunities in different parts of the world, and people access her work in different ways around the world. And I just sort of bring that global lens to the work that she does.
oh, she was so smart to
Thank
bring you
you.
on board to do that. Absolutely. I can
Thank you.
totally see that. So what is next for you, my dear? As if you're not busy enough. You have another book in
I
your back
do
pocket that you're
actually.
working on,
Yeah,
or
I do.
what? Oh
This
my
book did
goodness.
really, really
Do
well,
tell.
thanks to the amazing people who bought it. So my publisher was very, very excited about how the Lightmakers Manifesto was received, and so I do have another book deal with them that I am working on, and it is about actually being excited about getting older, and what that looks like to actually. It's sort of an evolution of um, figuring
Mm,
out how you can continue to serve as you get older, and also embracing that, as with everything, change comes, and change is not necessarily a negative
yeah.
thing, and actually can be more further enrich your life, like with the right mindset. The older you get, the more enriching life
Yeah.
gets, and sort of getting excited about all the potentiality and so I'm writing this book mostly because this year is a big year for me. I turned 55 this year. My 20th anniversary is this year. My daughter goes to college this year. So it's all a really, really big year. And it's sort of like talking
Wow.
about what does that look like as
Oh,
sort of this, I get a clean slate again. I'm not going to be mom as much anymore. I'm going to be more mentor than mom. And what does it look like to sort of reclaim that life, my own life again, and how do I shape it? So that's what it's going to be about.
that is such an
Thank you.
important subject to
Thank you.
tackle. It truly is. And I'm a little bit farther along my journey than you
Oh,
are. And so we
don't
could
make
talk.
promises you
I
can't
can,
keep,
I can
because
share some.
I may very, very well tap you for that. So don't just so you know.
Oh, but I mean, I'm at that age where, I am an empty nester. My daughter has, since graduated from
Yeah.
college and is now living her own life. But then I also have
Yep.
an elderly
Oh
mom
yeah.
who has Alzheimer's. So I'm in that generation, and staring my
Sure.
own mortality,
Yep.
in the face, as we all are. But when you get to
You
be a
start to
certain
see
age,
it
it's like,
coming.
okay,
Yeah.
this is like if it's a
Yeah.
3-act play,
Yeah, yeah,
we're in
yeah.
act
Yeah.
3. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is this going to look like? And how do I continue
Yeah.
to contribute? And, and especially with the way that society views people who
Especially
are
women,
aging.
especially women of color.
We
Yeah,
don't,
absolutely.
especially women. Yes.
Yeah, we
yes,
we
yes,
will.
yes. We can talk. We can talk. I'm okay. I'm
Thank you.
excited. I'm so excited to see what you do next. And this has been such a joy. And I've been looking forward to this for the longest time. And when I reached out to you and asked you if you'd be on the show, and you said yes, of course, I was like,
There,
oh my
there
gosh,
wasn't
I'm
even
pinching
a,
myself.
there wasn't
I was
even a
so
hesitation
excited.
on my part. This was absolutely happening.
Oh, well, I'm so glad we made it happen. And you are just a delight. If there's ever anything I can do for
Absolutely.
you,
Thank
you
you
know
so
where to
much.
find me.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wishing you all the best. Okay. Now you see why I was so excited about having Karen on the show. And I'm really looking forward to reading the next book. We'll be sure and have her back when that book comes out. In the meantime, thank you as always for being a part of the Our Voices Matter podcast family. Thank you for giving her permission to speak and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. As always, like, subscribe, download, share. You know the drill. We'll see you next time. Thanks again to our sponsor, BMW of West Houston. There's a special offer for members of the Our Voices Matter podcast community. Just click the link in the show notes, bmwwest.com.